And it was in the project that was talking about public health and part of a group of migrants that are crossing the countries and connected to some health issues. However, what actually prompted me to start this type of research through the literature and do this workshop was essentially when talking to students, realized they didn't know too much about this area. And they are always, they actually used to make different type of conclusions. They tried really hard, but obviously they didn't have all the necessary information. So I tried to give this workshop. Actually, I gave this workshop several times. And the other day I was really happy because after giving workshop, I was preparing some very difficult questions that are covering this area, and they are really, really good. So I was happy that I figured out that they actually can take this and knowledge and apply it. So and again, you are going to see through this presentation how this medical research or biomedical research is affecting different populations. And again, these are very often populations that are I would say discriminated or not protected certain ways. So we are going to see through the history and see how this was resolved and what's actually some major issue that we are having in this area, what are happening right now. And as you can see here, history of medical experiments on humans is very, very, very long. This is from the cast from the ancient Greek relief and showing physician examining patients, and again, there is a snake called around the staff. That's actually a symbol of the medicine. However, there is another really good book that I connected with this and talks about different type of medical research and connects it with the issues. They are okay, not okay, let's call it this way, for the good of the mankind, because whole idea of medical research was really to be for the good of mankind. However, many mishaps or treatments or prevention of the treatments happens along the way, and it's still happening in some ways, let's call it this way. So this book covers all these areas. However, just a reminder, the first time that we actually saw this talk about patient rights, about protecting human beings in terms of different experimentation was after Nuremberg Court in August 1947. That was verdict was called permissible medical experiments, and this is Nuremberg Court, and this is something that we are supposed to use today, or we are using according to Nuremberg Court. This is allowed, not allowed, and so on. So again, the Nuremberg trials were essentially the doctor's trials, and actually this happens. This is like a short text explaining what actually, but I'm sure that we know that, remember that, I mean, know from the literature. Look at the different trials or different experiments on humans that are considered war crimes, essentially, during Nuremberg trials. Interestingly, it's not usually, it's really horrifying when you talk about that, but they actually, doctors did high altitude experiments, freezing experiments, malaria experiments, mustard gas experiments, that was war gas, right? And sulfonamide experiments, that's type of like kind of like a treatment drug, bone muscle nerve regeneration, bone transplantation experiments, seawater experiments, epidemic jaundice, so kind of like a causing epidemic jaundice experiment, and then looking what's happening. Sterilization, there is something very specific here. It's called spotted fever experiment, very really specific one, difficult one, experience with poisons, and incendiary bomb experiments. And obviously this was like a defined and tried in Nuremberg trial, each of these points, proven. And at that moment, they decided actually to that voluntary consent of subjects is absolutely essential. And that the research that's really good for society is actually valid research. And again, that research shouldn't be unnecessary in nature, needs to give benefits to the humankind, in the same time to protect people who are actually in that part of research, let's call it this way. Because sometimes and very often that research is affecting really vulnerable groups. And we are also going to see through history what happens here. So all these studies, all this kind of research needs to put person, human being as a major point here, or look at a person and then see what are the benefits for the person and for humankind in terms of experiments. So and the important part here is the subject needs to have freedom to withdraw from the experiment. So whatever is done here, that subject needs to decide, the different reasons doesn't really matter, and actually to withdraw from that. And that's kind of like a protecting patients or subjects' freedom. And again, also there was a question, what's voluntary consent? And even today we have a couple of questions when we are talking about voluntary consent. In that, what they decided at the time is that person involved should have legal capacity to give consent. So legal capacity or to have abilities to understand, complete abilities to understand what's going on and to ask questions and then to decide by itself is going to select that or not. So that's a voluntary consent, and there is always really thin line when we are talking about voluntary consent. And very often people who are disadvantaged certain ways, there is always question about their voluntary consent or who's approving that, not approving that. So it's always difficult actually to decide about voluntary consent. However, there is also something that's called categorical vulnerability. And again, these are, this is kind of like a practical point of view. There are different approaches here. And this approach is to consider certain groups or population as really vulnerable groups, and can involve groups in society groups in society whose members share features that make them vulnerable. And very often, some of the vulnerable groups are children, prisoners, pregnant women, fetuses, mental disabled person, economically, educational disadvantaged person, a disadvantaged person, and can be also a certain way, disabled person in some other medical ways. And the good point here is the so-called Declaration of Helsinki that actually gives a list of this type of groups of populations that might be vulnerable. And again, this is expanding list, so they are actually nowadays improving the list and adding more information. However, whenever we are doing this type of research, we would say that according to the Declaration of Helsinki, this is done and that done, and so on. So again, as you can see here, for example, children, they are really vulnerable because they lack the fully developed capacity for autonomous decisions and so on. But however, this group of vulnerable group is becoming wider and wider in terms of how society deems them vulnerable or how they feel they are a vulnerable group. Going back to these different events, this is one example of Secret War chemical experiments. They tested troops by race. This is done in United States. I think it's done in military base in Naval Research Lab in Washington, D.C. They actually selected different people according to race, for example, Japanese, Puerto Ricans, and so on. And even color of the skin. The question was, is color of the skin, I mean, sounds really weird, color of the skin going to prevent if you put like a gas poison like that's used in a war, is it going to absorb differently? They even had different gas masks later on when they actually treated them, different gas masks according to the race. So,
wow,
and
it's the first time that I listen this.
Yeah, this looks totally crazy. You're going to hear more.
Into the
Yeah, and it was Journal American Medical Association. Funny, that's what the journal in where they actually used 500 men 40 soldiers of Japanese ancestry. So that was that part of the area when I think in that year, I think Japanese, citizens living in the United States, and there are Japanese soldiers are also affected here. They been voluntarily subject to mustard gas research, so that's voluntarily really questionable here. And again, they actually are segregated and they serve in certain military units, these soldiers. So even gas masks that were tested were used by race. So that's like a totally really strange story. And they essentially had reports showing penetration of lethal gases into different skin colors. This is what I was telling of research subject. And actually, they published data in professional publications like this one. So this was like
probably the United States implement this type of research with the Mexican people.
Yeah. So again, only in 1997, this is what I put in red. Again, this story, and then only in 1997, Chemical Weapons Convention came into force, signed by 192 countries, actually defining really well use on any chemicals in the conflicts and toward the people or on people and so on. And again, there is a real nice publication. This is Hidden War Chemistry, The Hidden War by Lombardo P. I don't remember the real name, but here's link in Nature in 2017. So that person is talking a lot about all these chemicals and use of chemicals in different situations like this, like atrocities and so on. So the other interesting story here is consent or coercion. The question is, people consent, or are they put certain position, again, either as vulnerable groups or disabled or not fully comprehending what's going on, or promising something, and they are coerced into that kind of action. And again, this is, I think that I have in presentation here. This is about also one book that was published. It's called Experimental Mass Continuum Medical Research Ethics in East Africa from 1940 to 2014. And that's actually a story of human experimentation in West Africa from all these years. And then when we are listening to this story, we can always say, yeah, this was old times and people are different and so on. But this is 2014. That's relatively recent, recent. And they actually checked made a medical research in the region. For example, doctors taking blood samples on the cover of darkness, or these African assistants going to door and convincing people to take, for example, taking stool samples or giving stool samples and so on. And kind of like a school children line up to receive injections without knowing what's actually going on, what are they receiving, what are side effects, and also. And also talking in the books, he talks about people that he met and what they actually understood or not understood about this part. This is another one, 1966. This is the medical administration in prison human research. This is Holmesburg Prison Human Research questioning the subjects in Philadelphia. So essentially, they were used. Prisoners were used for different experiments, like all the time, without any kind of validation or protection of their rights or their informed consent. So essentially, that was a group of people that were left to be experimented on without any consequences. So again, one of those groups here. And the most famous one here is, and again, this is a little bit older, but there are new things you are going to see, is Tuskegee study. And the Tuskegee studies was done in the United States. It was to observe natural history of untreated syphilis in Black population, and subjects were not informed, and they are not given treatment later on when penicillin was discovered. The funny part about this understanding of this, is when I was United States, and it was like a 90s, maybe end of the 90s. Usually when people mention this Tuskegee studies, they are all, oh, that's conspiracy theory. It didn't happen. Literally, this was in their mind, that was always conspiracy theory. And that's why I have kind of like pictures and documents here. And this is actually data presented by this guy. So he actually had controls and syphilis and total 411 people. And it says controls infected during observation. So essentially they had controls infected. And then there is also known death number 97 53% control, 62 people with syphilis, total 59%. And again, he was adding even more of these patients during this trial. Again, this is a literally original experiment of his research on these people. So this is really long-lasting experiment. Started when there was no cure syphilis. Later on, when the penicillin was discovered, these people are not given therapy. They are not informed that they are given therapy. These people are African American men in Macomb County, Alabama, very low socioeconomic level, and they did actual research for 15 years. And also, this was done in Tuskegee Institute. Now it's Tuskegee University. And interestingly, this school was founded in 1881 by Booker T. Washington. That's like a famous figure in terms of education and reading and so on, literacy in the United States. So everybody knows about him. So again, for 40 years, they came back and tested in this county. So it was not like a one-time event. It was not like a short period of time. It was 40 years. And they actually promised them money for their families for burial in exchange for the right to do autopsy after that. So not only that they are infected, not only they are not given treatment once when it was discovered, then they are actually offered, their families were offered money in order to give samples after their death to continue that research. So this was like a totally insane terms of any ethical issues research. And then you look at a vulnerable group, again, this typical vulnerable group, low socioeconomic level of these people. And again, this is like a whole list of highly radical parts of the study. So people who research this, they actually came up with a major list here. First, these are they violated constitutional rights of the participants. They know that they have syphilis. They know they have there is a treatment. They didn't treat them, and also that kind of like blackmailing them in order to have their funeral costs covered to actually give samples. Also, they were not informed what about treatment options. Yes, it was racially motivated, and again, they actually even advertised, gave misleading advertisement, kind of like a last chance for special free treatment. So even though they are not given treatment, so they actually lied on that one. And no regulations on this study. Another part here is, and this is something that I really like, this book, and I read it several times, is The Mortal Life of Henrietta Lack. And I'm just going to show the story pretty soon in a couple of slides. This is the woman also in the United States. She actually developed a certain type of cancer, uterus cancer. And at that time, when researchers were doing any kind of like a research with the cells, you need to grow them and to develop them in order to keep the line alive. And sometimes even today, when we are doing that, they die or something happens and you have to start again and so on. However, we have these companies that are selling these different type of cells. At that period of time, people didn't know how to do that. So they will actually grow a cell line. It will be dead in like a 2 days, 3 days, so they couldn't develop that. However, they took her cancerous cells, so-called HeLa cells that we are using today, and actually they multiplied and they never died. So her cells never ever died, and people are able to actually multiply them, to grow them. And even today, we use HeLa cells. So essentially, these are her cells that we are using today. There are banks of the cells, and we did experiments on HeLa cells. And again, this is the line of cells that we are using, HeLa cells. And the interesting story about this one, as I said, they just kind of continue to reproduce, and all researchers were able to actually get those ones. So and this is from the writer of this text of this book. I'm sorry, textbook. She said, and that's a major point here, that Henrietta cells were different. They reproduce entire generation every 24 hours. That was also because sometimes it's a long period. You have to wait and wait and wait. This is the first immortal human cells ever grown in the lab. That's those cells. However, again, she was a poor African American. She was raised on a tobacco farm in Virginia. And actually, after she died, she was treated for that cancer. However, cancer treatment at that time was really bad, not really developed. So again, I mean, doctors did try to help her. At that time, interesting story that she's telling in textbook. Even doctors carry like a tube of radioactive material in their pockets right here. So no protection there because they are just thinking about radioactive treatment. However, her cancer was getting worse and worse. She was bleeding a lot and so on. So there's real nice explanation. I mean, really kind of like a heartbreaking story about her disease and about her life. And after she died, actually, they just took cells and called them HeLa cells because Henrietta lack. And says what they usually say, the world's population has benefited from research using, most of the world's population benefited from using these HeLa cells. And as you can see here, for example, it helped us to understand viral infections. Researchers were able to actually develop vaccines for polio, for human papillomavirus, for cervical cancers. Also, these cells are used for cures for hemophilia, herpes, influenza, leukemia, Parkinson, and also contribute to chemotherapy, gene mapping, in vitro fertilization, and so on. So it's like amazingly how much of the research body or research has been done on these cells. However, these cells were taken from her, and nobody was informed. Family was not informed. Again, she had died really early on and left children. This is her daughter that she left at age 4. She was age 4. They never ever had any kind of like a medical treatment. They are socioeconomically really poor. They couldn't afford lawyers to actually go through this process of suing and so on. So this is the story that goes about this HeLa cells. Yeah, and it's really, it's a terrible story, and the book is written so nicely because this writer, she talks about her life, talks about medical issues, ethical issues, also socioeconomical issues, political issues at times. So it's really nice writing, beautiful writing, the way she did it. And again, let me just show, I don't have it here. Yeah, okay. Sorry.
But this is the
this is
1950 when she
50s,
died.
yes, 50, I think
Then
54,
speak
55.
about, more or less,
Yeah,
70 years ago.
right.
They implement this type of experiment, we can call.
Yeah, right.
Okay, thanks.
And again, as you can see, I'm trying to actually give this story, even though there are more examples of these events, kind of like a constant continuation, or events that are not just one-time event, because people didn't know, didn't understand, or there was like a really some scientists that was not okay, not ethical. But there was like what I saw here doing through this research, even though I didn't put everything here, is constant drip of this type of unethical treatment of people, different people, and again, targeted people who are really,
common line.
yeah, really,
This is the problem with that.
yeah, really people who are really vulnerable. This is also another story when Dr. Chester Saddam injected live cancer cells into elderly patients. This was Jewish Chronic Disease Hospital in Brooklyn. And again, there are some of his colleagues actually kind of ask questions about this type of attitude. His or experiment, his idea was to see if he injected cancer cells into patients, what's going to happen with the cancer, or are they going to develop it, and so on. None of the patients were informed about risks, so nobody, and these were patients in the hospital. Yeah, again, one subgroup of vulnerable groups, if we are talking about that. And again, he also experimented on healthy subjects because he thought it's going to give him more accurate results. So again, he went to the source that was normal at the time. It was prisoners. And again, the immune system responded better than these patients who are cancer patients. So he injected them with HeLa cells. So that's that connecting story. But again, giving you both cases that really unethical behavior. However, there are a couple of three doctors there. They refused to participate in experiments. They actually called this what happened in the World War II and complained to the board. So one of them said, I don't want Nazi practices of using human beings and experimental guinea pigs. So they actually needed to stop the experiment.
No, I like that they call Nazi experiment.
Yeah, right.
Because it is the philosophy and that to try to test with the disadvantaged group, race, religion, or other things, probably to increase the benefits for all the people in the world, but to select the target group
right.
under experiment with this particular disadvantaged conditions, social, cultural, economical, and other also connected to the race, because all experiments are with yellow man, Japanese, or black women. That is very important to focalize this, that they implemented this unethical approach of the medicine only towards disadvantaged that group, but in a strong way. That is interesting. Is I take some point because I didn't know.
And there is another one, Cincinnati radiation experiments. As you can see, we are moving a little bit chronologically. 60 to 72, that was real time. And again, cancer patients, mostly Black or below average intelligence in this case. And they were exposed to large doses of whole body radiation as a part of experiment. And it was sponsored by US military. And none of the subjects gave informed consent. And they thought they are receiving treatment for their cancer. And again, same story here. And they actually started subjects, of course, exposed to radiation, experienced nausea, vomiting, actual radiation sickness, pain from burns of their body. So actually, this is like a huge amounts of radiation if you have burns, if they had burns on their bodies. And some died prematurely. And they actually started litigation, and only in 1999, a settlement was announced. So it was 60 to 72, and 1999 finally legally when their actually settlement was announced. And again, this is like a tiny reminder how radiation affects human body, damages DNA, mutation of surviving cells can actually result in late carcinogenesis. There is end organ functional damage. There is also epithelial cell death because there is no barrier, for example, in the skin and mucosa and so on. So it's really horrible events in those physiologically. And again, there is another book. It's called The Treatment, The Story of Those Who Died in Cincinnati Radiation Test by Martha Stevens. And she is actually explaining, going through a whole history of these events and talking to people and their families and how all this happened and how end. And the interesting, again, as I said, I try to, even though there are many of these events that can actually be collected, I try to.
We can spend the money at the end, in the last month, because the Fedele.
Sorry, you can have the microphone open.
Spend the money in the last month. You spend the money for your research, not at the end. So it's better to do another now than when you are for actually NNA that we use in Uganda.
No, this is
when you are there, there are other things because when we ask to
hello, you have the microphone open.
I remember that we told him all the reagents and for experiment we can cover.
Pizza.
So now we have the plasmid, we buy the saRNA. I don't know about it.
Can you
general reagent that maybe they can give you or not because we didn't talk about this. So if when you arrive in Groningen and if you have some particular reagent that you have to use,
interesting that you speak of that.
Until now you use for
on the other Zoom.
For then for regarding course about 250. 300, 1,000. Then for the price 400. Okay.
It is not.
So 400 and back.
Okay.
Yeah.
I called him.
Yes, it is that. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. And what I hear, I was trying to.
The group in SSST then.
Is to go to these chronological events and just show this is December 22, 2022. I think this was one of the Associated Press published this, that California Medical University apologizes for experimenting on prisoners. So researchers at the University of California, San Francisco conducted dozens of unethical medical experiments, including injecting pesticides and herbicides into men's veins. So again, another set of the treatment of this kind of like vulnerable people at certain point of that time or life or country. And it was only in 2022 they actually apologized for doing that. So it took, I was kind of surprised because I thought this is real bad and they're going to do that once when the experiment is done, either litigations, some court is involved, apologies. Yeah. And so on, but they actually didn't. So they just prolonged for a long period of time. Oh, yes, these days. This is next page. I don't know. It's maybe click on the page first. Maybe. Yeah. Okay. This one. Yeah. So this is, I would say, a little bit modern approach or more soft approach toward the same way of treatment certain groups, but again trying to stay within the lines of these ethical concerns. And it's called Exportation of Unethical Practices to Low and Middle Income Countries in Biomedical Research. So this is a paper that was published in 2017. And again, they actually do a really good review of these practices, and it's called ethic dumping practices. So essentially, the whole idea is if in a country where either experiments or new treatment of the drug or testing of the new drug, clinical trials, usually clinical trials 1 are done, they are going to go to a completely different country in order to avoid all these rules that are necessary to be done. So, for example, these are patient recruitment issues, And methodological issues, also advantages in dealing with authorities and research ethics committees, much easier to get maybe approval, or they are less rigorous, or not really, they still don't know about, in a lot of middle income countries, not aware of the exact issues with the research. There are also recruitment advantages. For example, increased patient discomfort burden is really seriously taken into account when doing this research in certain countries. However, there are countries, low or middle income countries, where they actually avoid that. And also advantages due to increased prevalence of certain diseases. So saying this is, for example, they did studies on antibiotic treatment of diarrhea conducted in New Mexico. And also economic advantages, because these studies are less costly. And even though the whole work is burden is the same, and very often local people, local researchers are involved in the studies, local hospitals are involved in studies, local patients are involved in the studies. So essentially, it's just like a ethic dumping and even work dumping other people, and just like a pulling necessary data there. And also logical advantages, because they have short implementation time, they don't have to wait for many approvals, and patient recruitment may be shorter. However, they also sometimes offer questionable incentives to researchers. And again, this is a table from this paper, and they actually did research over different countries and came up with this table. So we have this examples of the ethics dumping. If you have any questions or would like to comment, just feel free. So that's open here. And again, here, for example, European Commission defines this exportation of research practices. Thank you so much. Sorry. Exportation of research practices that would not be accepted in Europe on ethical grounds. So essentially, it's not that, for example, that these researchers are doing studies in low-income countries because they want to collect more data, do real research practice. This is more exportation, because ethical dumping, I was talking about that one, because it wouldn't be accepted in European Union. So. And also, many of these research organizations are looking and doing this in low or middle developed or low developed countries, regardless whether drugs tested can be marketed under local economies. Okay. So again, it's just like to override all these different ethical issues and do it much faster and much more simple for them, but at the same time, really bad for the population and for the patients. So there is this Council for International Organization of Medical Sciences, and it's giving international ethical guideline involving humans. And again, they are also focusing on these vulnerable groups. And there is World Medical Association that's actually on their website. There is Declaration of Helsinki, how this research is done. Pretty much we all know how it's done, but even now there are a number of issues here. And according to Oxford textbook, clinical research, every human being has right to determine what shall be done with his own body. They need to know the context of syringe and its knowledge. And if this knowledge was to cause fear and anxiety or make them frightened, they had right to be fearful and frightened, and thus say no to the if you are collecting data, if you are collecting data like a surveys, or asking them, well, how do you feel? Does it hurt? Like a very simple questions. Again, they need to have informed consent, and they need to actually confirm that they are participating in this study. So it doesn't matter, because sometimes people are not sure if I'm not really taking something like a samples like before. It's not, it is. And they need to voluntarily participate. And also researchers should avoid excessive harms to participants or more benefits. And essentially, when they figure out that something is going real bad, it means that there is possible harm, they need to actually stop the study. That's how it's done. And in terms of another vulnerable group, because we did lots of research in migration and migration policies, especially together with our political department, there is also a complete research ethics and refugee health and consideration application. It's published in Conflict Health article here. So really nice group of authors, 2020. So I have name of the article here. And they actually did some preliminary assessment of the application of these EDCA principles from the literature. And they essentially consider or think or concluded that they need to be more ethical framework for especially this type of vulnerable category of the people. Again, protocol reviews, appropriate incentive use, and consideration of cultural practices that needs to be involved or needs to be incorporated in future investigation in this population. So they even put a nice table. I'm not going to read this one, but whoever wants to read the article, that would be really great. Pre-investigation phase, investigation, and post-investigation phase. Some of these are actually standard ones. But some of these are really specific for this particular group of people, and again, needs to be implemented in protocols. And again, as I said the other day when I was talking to you, Angela, talking about just collecting data via mobile app, and again, there were so many questions that even we were not sure, especially when there are several countries involved in this process. So this is very difficult. So I think the really more that would be a nice part of research project, actually developing all these protocols at this moment of time.
There is not only a problem of the different laws according to the privacy law, but also to the culture of the different population. Because if you implement a project around the world, it's necessary that you consider different approach, the different cultural underground that each population, each area has.
Right.
Because
Yeah, that's
without considering the different aspect of race, religion, and so on, but the cultural aspect is very important.
Yeah, and as you can see, at the very beginning, I think that we moved next step much closer to protecting different groups. It was like a race. It was color of skin. Right now, we have a little bit
but
different.
That when you implement some action to protect a particular group, it's necessary that you don't create a specific discrimination towards
other group, right?
Then the intersectionality, then it is the analysis of to affront, to consider a wide range of possibilities.
Right. Yeah, that's
discrimination is necessary that you improve, because this is an aspect that is also in the project. It's necessary that you don't consider only the technical aspect, but also the social, cultural implements that this project can be produced.
Right.
That is in my opinion, it is the future step of the future project, because it is necessary to insert also this this aspect to create a project useful for wide group of people.
Right. Okay, and there is one of the authors actually was involved in publishing these groups, Encyclopedia of Immigrant Health and its ethical issues in research with immigrants and refugees. So really good one, and it can be helpful. Again, when we are talking about this particular population involved in research. And there are several chapters about these ethical issues. And again, there is another issue here, probably mentioned. However, it's not harm to do it again. Inclusive consent practices for vulnerable group, so that ensuring informed consent is absolutely necessary for ethically involving these vulnerable populations research. And inclusive consent practices, again, respects, as you said, participant autonomy, cultural background, comprehension abilities, facilitating trust and meaningful participation. Anything that's coerced is not going to be meaningful, and trust can be broken really easily if all these points are not in the compound. And again, in these practices, for example, for inclusive consent is always language accessibility, multiple languages, translating documents in local language. Very often we have a question because either we need translators or someone is speaking English and there is English speaking person, and English speaking person is also part of the group is translating. So it's, I think, necessary to have more, I would say, organized or more straightforward communication in terms of language, and also cultural sensitive protocols, again, to respect cultural norms and traditions. For example, they did some also research and show example of these cultural sensitivity protocols, vaccine trials among Maori population in New Zealand, really important for researchers, and also community engagement, so involving community representatives in developing the consent process. For example, local communities, or even maybe part of the population or vulnerable group that is there more communicating with the local communities. So that would be also something that, as I said, mentioned in the project, we are also planning to do that. For example, HIV prevention studies in sub-Saharan Africa, so local communities are involved in this process. Okay, so this was, I think the time almost on time. Yeah, this was my presentation, but